become sort of famous for your views on gender identity and the relationship between trans identity. And I wanted to start with basic distinctions. On the one hand, sex, on the other hand, gender. The first one is supposed to denote biological, physiological makeup of people. And the second one is meant to recognize a social identity and a social role that people play. And the claim is that those two things can become untethered from one another.
To put it quite that way, to be honest, it's certainly not where the present discourse is. The sex bit was fine. The gender bit is spiralling off into something that's actually not very social at all. It's supposed to be psychological, it's supposed to be individual, it's to do with how you feel.
Gender women are real women. I don't think of it in that way as in like the DNA situation or what my ID says. I'm a female. And when people look at me, that's what they think I am. When I think of that question, I think of how people perceive me and how I look. And that would be a female.
When the question is, are real women, well, we present, we act, and we go through life as women. And so that's why when I hear are trans women real women, to me, that means yes, because when we're walking down the street or interacting with people, hopefully they're not checking underneath our skirts.
People just clock you at whatever box they have in their head. And as long as you fit into that binary, you're going to be perceived as that. But even if you don't fit into that binary, it doesn't mean that you're not a woman. I think as long as that's how you feel inside, that's all that really matters.
The definition of gender that we got in the 1970s, that was a social idea of a role.
I reckon the man should wear the pants, you know. He should sort of be the boss in the family, you know. Sort of, well, I'd rather him go out to work and earn the money than me go out and earn the money and look after the kids, you know.
A lot of young women are very conscious of the inferior role of women in society.
They are conditioning us to take the place of, say, the average housewife. I mean, as we're brought up, we play with the dolls. I mean, it's all type of bringing the idea that a woman's place is to rear children, to be a housewife. She's not going to really have a career of her own or anything like that.
And I think there are going to be some women that can't be liberated because they're quite content to be this stereotype and be inferior to man and be, you know, the hanger-on.
Have you all been talking and thinking a lot more about the ideas that women might live slightly differently since Germaine Greer came here?
Yes. My father has voiced many opinions that he didn't think it was a good thing and that it made women dissatisfied with the life they had.
You see, I hear a lot of men say now, this has brought a sort of unrest into my household. My wife was happy before she realised that while the children were little, she had to stay at home because we both think that, you know, children need the mother and so forth. And then she thought she'd go out and work. But I heard a lot of young men saying this. Now, my household's sort of upset since Germaine Greer came. Everyone's talking about women's liberation. The women are getting together to talk about women's liberation.
I wish that was true.
I think it is true.
Well, I think what men mistake for happiness was, in fact, resignation and patience. And now women are beginning to feel that patience is not the answer. When you look at the sort of government and the social services and so on that this country has, then women have just got to start getting annoyed about it because there's got to be a new kind of pressure group for justice.
Some cultures prescribe how we behave as men or women very tightly. Here in the weird world, not so much. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, a tomboy who was also busy playing classical piano 2 hours a day. I was allowed to do boy-typical things and girl-typical things, and none of that had any effect on whether or not I was or was not a girl. I was. As I have written, what do girls do? Girls become women. Some girls play in the dirt, some girls dream, have tea parties, girls do a lot of other things, but what do all girls do? If they grow up, they become women. Are there some cases in which the developmental environment is so confused or confusing that people really feel that they need to be living in the body of the sex that they are not? That does seem to happen sometimes. Are they actually able to change sex? No. No, they are not. And given that we are humans living in a weird world, why do you need to start calling yourself the sex that you are not or pretend that you are the sex that you are not? Because increasingly, starting around in the 70s or maybe even earlier than that, everything was open.
David Bowie, no one thought you were a girl.
And, and David Bowie's one of my favorite examples. I loved Bowie. I loved Bowie growing up. He was extraordinary. He was gender bending. And he was also, over in his actual sexuality, he was, bisexual. He was always a man. He never doubted that. No one around him ever doubted that, right? He dressed up flamboyantly and he played with stereotypes and he played with roles. And humans have been doing that forever. We play with role a lot, but it doesn't change our fundamental nature. And
around this century, got Tumblrized into it's in your head, it's an identity, and that's a whole different distinction to the original one.
Being a woman is within your brain and what's in your heart, girl. You know what I mean? And your spirit. And your mother's spirit, bitch.
It is not about physicality. Woman is something far deeper and far more complex than that.
Got nothing in my brain. Got nothing in my brain.
This is the kind of gender politics that you find problematic, the idea that it's somehow a private mental state that defines your gender identity.
Well, I wouldn't care at all if people weren't trying to reify it into law and policy, right? I would no problem with people saying that they are one thing or the other, or acting in any way, or altering their bodies if that's how they feel. But through quite powerful institutions, and it's happening internationally, actually, there's this idea that your inner gender identity, which can come completely apart from your sex and your gender expression even, in the old sense, should determine your rights and access to spaces or resources or sports teams or rape crisis shelters or whatever. Now, that obviously poses a problem, particularly for females, I think, because it allows males to basically say they have this private state that nobody can tell them they don't have. Built into the policies, it's all part of the rhetoric that nobody can tell you that you don't have the identity that you think you do. We can go into the problems there, but I think there are some problems there.
What I'm describing here are some of the necessary entailments of defining the word woman in a circular way, as a person who says they are a woman. If a woman is not a material reality, that one is or is not without regard to one's inner sense of identification, but instead an inner subjective belief that takes precedence over one's sex anatomy, then men who say they are women have a right to be in the women's sauna and shower and locker room, and they can file a complaint with the Civil and Human Rights Commission, which can levy fines against a women's spa where women are required to be naked, as one trans-identified male did with the Seattle Human Rights Commission against a Korean-owned spa. He succeeded, and he posted himself on social media celebrating the triumph of the progress of civil and human rights in which he was just involved.
I've made an app for women. Great, I've signed up. You're a bloke. I'm a woman. End of story. Well, I'm kicking you off. Well, I'm taking you to court. Roxy Tickle is a legal lady woman, and you are guilty of indirect discrimination. Well, this is crazy. I will appeal.
It is the worst case scenario. They have literally eradicated the concept of biological sex in law. It doesn't exist. It has no weight in law. It has none. We know that now. We have some facts. The activists, they cannot deny it anymore. Let's go forward.
I think we should always have some kind of law that protects what you might call gender non-conforming people. I would say sex non-conforming, because this word gender's just got so polluted, from discrimination. So men who want to dress like women or change their bodies to look like women, and women who want to look like men, and lesbians and gays and all sorts of things. Nobody should be discriminated against for being sex non-conforming.
What are trans rights? If by trans rights we mean the human rights that everybody has, freedom of belief, freedom of expression, safety, dignity, to be able to work without prejudice and so on, absolutely trans-identified people have exactly the same rights as everybody else, and so they should. You should not be able to fire somebody or refuse to rent to them or kick them out of a bar or any of those things like that. What the trans rights or human rights is meant to mean is that unless you go along with a trans-identified person's identity rather than their actual sex, you are denying their human rights. And they will often say, you're denying my right to exist. So if a man who identifies as a woman takes that as meaning that he can come into women-only spaces, he destroys the women-only spaces. That's just a logical statement. He's a man, so he comes into a woman's space. It's no longer a women-only space.
I'm not saying trans people are a fiction. They're people. They exist, not mad. But it's not anything to do with the status of trans people as existence. I'm saying the best analysis of the claim people make about trans people, and that some trans people make about themselves, I think they are immersing themselves in a fiction. Not all trans people, by the way. Like, I know plenty of trans women who say, I'm a man.
I swear to God, have never related to this weird aspect of so many trans people that I see, that they want to be a woman. I know it sounds so like, you kind of have to stick with me when I explain this, but it's not that like me being trans means that I ever wanted to be a woman. I know that sounds so contradictory because it's so antithetical towards like the talking points and like what trans is described as, which is like a man who wants to be a woman. Actually, for me, it was just about living in a body I feel comfortable with and mitigating gender dysphoria as a medical condition. I was never under any impression or misconception that me transitioning would make me a woman.
You also sort of outwardly state that you're a biological woman living as a man. Is that's sort of the same idea?
Yes, that's a good point, because the trans ideology rejects biology and common sense. Transsexual people have always existed, and they have never, until now, rejected their own biology and the biological truth behind being a trans person. So I like to make it very clear what my situation is. I'm not trying to pretend that I'm a real man or I'm the same as a biological male, but that's what the trans community is doing. That's what trans ideology is. They're erasing actually the definition by saying trans women are women and trans men are men, and that's what I'm against.
I just was kind and loving to everyone and never demanded that anybody call me she. I accepted different people have their own beliefs, and I used to say that like pronouns or whatever makes you comfortable. Because
Beautiful.
I never expect someone to go against their own internal feelings and make
Beautiful.
themselves uncomfortable just to make me feel better.
So I'm in alignment with you. That's how I live my life. If someone would call me she, they're just going to do it. What are you going to do about it? Right? I'm not gonna get my panties in a wad because people are like, you're a real female. I am a female. That's actually real. I actually am. But so what? I have a problem. It's called a mental disorder. There is no doubt I have a mental disorder. It's not normal for me to want to be a man and I'm a woman, dude. This is not normal. And that's okay. I've accepted it. I'm totally cool with it. 30-something years, here I am. But I still understand that I'm not normal, and this isn't a normal thing for somebody to want to do. It's a very drastic thing.
So you have to learn to contain that to some extent, and you want to express that in a way that is normal and sane, like, not going to cause discomfort to people. And definitely don't go into opposite sex spaces. Like, let female spaces be female spaces. If you're going to express yourself in a gender nonconforming way, just learn to go into the male spaces. If I was going out like this in public, I would use like the male space. Like, there's no reason for me to go into the female space. The more we normalize feminine males, the more we normalize gender nonconforming males, then the easier it will be for males to use male spaces and for females to keep the female space protected for females. That's how it ought to be. Learning to express yourself and maintaining a male identity, and not feeling like it's necessary to adopt this trans identity as a social container for your expression of yourself. And we just need to get over the idea that transness is the answer to these desires, because it's not. It leads to problems. It leads to inauthenticity. Despite the trans narrative, it's like, oh, we're being authentic to ourselves. No, you are running away from your natural state of being. You are running away from your natural identity. You're running away from ontology, from the reality of who you are. The whole social construction of this artificial identity, trying to pretend that you're a woman, trying to pretend that you're this like trans person, when in reality, just there's nothing wrong with just accepting that you are a man who has a predilection for femininity. There's nothing wrong with that. And, I think we're sort of like just like challenging reality. And I think it's just like healthier to just ground your identity in what is real and what is empirical. I am an autogynephilic male who likes to express myself in a feminine way, and that doesn't take away from my manhood, and that there's nothing wrong with being a man. There's nothing, diseased about being a man. Testosterone is not a poison. Testosterone is not a disease. Being a man is not a bad thing. Being a feminine man is not a bad thing.
And I think when people, for well-meaning reasons or otherwise, say trans women are literally women, there's no difference between a woman and a trans woman, or at least no relevant difference, then there's something gone wrong with their beliefs.
What most polls find is that people generally support trans activism and the trans rights slogans when they're just slogans without any substance to them, like trans women are women or trans rights now. However, once it's more specifically explained to them what these slogans actually mean, support tends to decrease and even drop off precipitously. I mean, that's not how it is with gay marriage. If someone explained gay marriage in more detail, it sounds better. So you're saying two men who love each other should be able to come together and commit to spending the rest of their lives together in a monogamous, faithful relationship? That's what gay marriage is. That's what marriage equality should be. And if you explain to people that that is what they're signing off on, that only makes it sound better. It's only going to heighten the support of someone who supports gay marriage. But what about, okay, so you're saying trans women are women. You think that a biological male should just be able to decide they're a woman and enter a woman's changing room and get naked in the presence of lots of other women and even young girls. When you explain to people that's what they're supporting when they say trans women are women, unsurprisingly, the polls say they don't support it. So trans activists are pushing an idea that most people wouldn't support. Most people haven't even been informed about what's going on, and it's never been put to a public vote. And somehow they've managed to push this through virtually unopposed. That's strange and suspicious and significantly radically different from an actual civil rights movement.
We've done polling, and it's quite difficult when you do polling to ask people the question, because if you say a trans woman, quite a lot of people think that's a woman who identifies as a man. A trans woman is a man who identifies as a woman, or somebody who perhaps really is a woman trapped in a man's body, or whatever that means. So in their mind, trans woman means basically a woman who had the unfortunate accident of being born male. That sounds crazy, but when you ask the question in polling, you really have to ask it carefully to make sure that people understand what you're asking. But when you ask it carefully, saying a man who identifies as a woman who may or may not have had surgery, should they be allowed into women's changing rooms, showers, sports? Less than 30% say yes.
For some of the reasons that it would matter, let's say if you had been born a man and now you're presenting as a woman, why is important that I know you were actually a man?
You were born a man and you decided to wear a dress and put makeup on, and now you say you're a woman. In what situations should I go along with that? What situations should I be forced to pretend that you really are a woman? In most situations in life, we don't differentiate legally between how you treat men and how you treat women. You pay them the same, employ them to do the same jobs, but where you have rules that treat men and women differently, they're around fairness in sport, dignity and safety in any situation where people are taking their clothes off, basically, and data. So healthcare, your doctor needs to know whether you're a man or a woman. And even though people know that when looking at you, the data has to be right too, because otherwise, you have algorithms, you have calculations, you have policies, you have risk assessments, which go on what's on paper. It doesn't work to say, of course, everyone knows, but on paper, we're going to say that you're a woman, because sometimes you're making decisions on paper, and those will be the wrong decisions if you're trying to interpret your heart monitor or something like that.
When it comes to the issue of the threat of violence against women from men that claim they're women, I wanted to ask you what you think the sort of core driving force of violence against women is, and whether it is somehow linked to physiology, or whether it's linked more to the kind of social roles that, men and women play in society. Men are more sort of powerful physically on average than women, and so maybe that does enable them to
maybe
sure that is
in
important.
everything in the human world, pretty much I think some exceptions. There's a natural contribution and there's a social contribution. It's hard to find the boundaries, but what we can say is that males, on average, like other great ape species that we are, the males, powerful, bigger shoulders, taller, longer limbs, bigger lungs, bigger extremities, and all the rest. Obviously, that's not an essential claim. There's variation. I'm 6 foot tall, but you can make generalizations.
Trans ideology largely defends, excuses trans women who are men. They're not a subset of women. They are men who claim to be women, feel they are women, or identify as women, or all of those three things. And so they offend against women and girls at the same rate and in the same way as other men. It's very straightforward. But what trans ideology does is it fools some of the public, it fools some of the legislators, the criminal justice agencies, and some women themselves. I didn't think anyone on the planet would pretend to believe that trans women are women, and I still maintain that today there isn't one person alive that believes that trans women are women. The trans bit is a clue, and the fact that they're men is another one. I think that many people genuinely believe that trans-identified males should be allowed to identify as women, should be given all of the legal rights and access to women-only services and facilities. But I don't think that they think for a second that they are women. We all know the material reality of our biological sex and the significance of that. I do think, and I've really, really spent time thinking hard about this, because the Orwellian madness that surrounds me and has surrounded me with this debate for 2 decades has made me do so. Does anyone really believe trans women are women, trans men are men? No, they don't. And this is how it's got us into the trouble we're in. Because, of course, if you believe that, and if you genuinely put that forward as the thesis and as the basis on which we build society, then of course you will have men going for cervical smear tests. Of course you will have women going to have their prostate examined. You will not be able to organise society in the way that it needs to be organised in a practical way, let alone the rights that women have fought for and won that are now under such great threat that in many countries they're being actually rolled back. Just this week, figures have been published that show that domestic violence incidents, reported domestic violence incidents, which will be a tiny minority of those that happen, are massively on the rise. And yet convictions have plummeted. There has to be some kind of revolution. And I don't mean a revolution like chopping off aristocrats' heads. I mean something truly revolutionary where it's recognised that women live under a state of tyranny, where it's just seen as every day when we open the newspaper and see yet another woman has been killed by her violent husband because she was about to leave him. If we were to say to trans people, as I have over the years, we will help you by giving you pointers as to how you can set up your own refuges, your own rape crisis centres, your own hostels and facilities for trans women only, we will do that because we built ours from scratch with no funding. What we don't want is you in our spaces. And then some trans activists will say, so you're saying all trans women are rapists then? You're saying all trans women are dangerous, predatory, risk to women? And I say to them what I said 40 odd years ago when I first became a feminist, and I was challenged on this by straightforward, ordinary blokes who were just sexist and not pretending to be women. When they said to me, why do you need your own refuges, love? Are you saying we're all rapists? And I said, no, ordinary man with a beard. I'm not saying that. I'm saying enough of you are that we need to make sure we keep all of you out. And that way we stay safe. Right? Because we've never said all men are rapists. We've never said all men are potential rapists. We've said we don't know which men are going to pose a risk to us if they come into our swimming baths and changing rooms and refuges. We really don't know because you tend not to have it written on your forehead. And actually, you tend not to look like a nonce or a batterer or a rapist. There's no such thing. It's just men that make that choice to do that have been given carte blanche to do that. And I say the same to these so-called allies. We've never said all trans women, all trans-identified men are going to sexually assault women. They'll just do it at the same rate, the same pattern, the same percentage as other men.
Societies can put in place measures to try and tone that down. You know, you can have elaborate kinds of behavioural codes, you can have a strong carceral state or whatever it is, but you can do things. And obviously some societies are much more violent than others, but the base level is not nothing. And I think what it's very easy for academics, not people that are really in their bodies very much, in my experience, academics, to kind of get all abstract about, all these possible permutations. And it also is non-coincidentally gives academics power because they get to construe the world any way they want. But there are facts about males and females, and they make a difference to our social life, and we need to protect females from predatory males. So every society needs to protect females from predatory males. And it's crazy to unpick all the good work feminists have done since the 70s and putting in these domestic violence refuges and rape crisis shelters on the basis of this mad idea that a man who thinks he's a woman is a woman. It's bonkers.